So, Mexican Grand Prix last weekend, what a fascinating race weekend that was. A huge shift in the dynamic for the title fight between Norris, Piastri, Verstappen. We saw battles between the two-stop strategy coming later in the race and holding on with the one-stop strategy, like Leclerc versus Verstappen. It was such an interesting race. There's so much to analyze. But the first thing I'm going to look at is, and this is really, this is something that's different to what we've seen all season, is this qualifying pace difference between Norris and Piastri. Norris absolutely had the edge on, had the edge on everyone, but to a huge extent had the edge on Piastri. And I'm going to start off doing analysis of Norris pole lap versus Piastri's fastest qualifying lap to see, where exactly are the differences. The first huge difference is coming into turn one. Norris is so committed on the brakes. He brakes so much later than Piastri. Gains like 3/10 just through this first sequence of corners, mainly on the brakes. So we'll have a look. So watch Norris coming through the first chicane. Just watch how committed he is on the brakes. Super late on the edge braking and gets it hooked up really nicely through the first apex. Whereas you compare that to Piastri. Now watch Piastri. Piastri brakes a little bit earlier, isn't quite as committed into the corner, and then the thing is, because Norris has broke so late and broke on the limit, he's asking the car to decelerate so quickly that he's just got the nose pitched in so well, so that when he rotates into the first corner, the weight is on the nose and the car just turns. Whereas watch Piastri, because Piastri's he's not broke as late, he's not asking the car to decelerate as quickly, so there's less weight over the front axle. And he just can't get the car rotated around the first apex quite as well. And then that also compromises, because he can't rotate it as much through the first apex, compromises his line through the next two apexes as well. Have a look. Yeah, so the braking is the first big difference. Later braking by Norris, more committed under brakes, helps the rotation through the first apex. Watch them both again, just quickly. So this is Piastri on the bottom. See how the car it just doesn't seem like it rotates quite as well versus Norris. Just more committed. And this is the other big difference. This is a huge difference here. This curb usage on the second apex. Norris is so much more aggressive over that second curb, which opens up the third apex. Look at this. This is a huge difference. This is a huge difference. Norris is almost hitting the bollard. Piastri's not even over on the orange curb. It's a huge difference. And if we look at the data here, we zoom in. So Norris is the purple line, Piastri is the orange line. Norris, late braking, huge time gain. Look at the delta line here. But also, this here, this minimum speed through the second apex. This is, Piastri's doing, 101, Norris is at 112, 10 kph difference, because Norris is keeping his line so much, he's opening his line so much more. He's not asking the car to do a tighter corner, he's just cutting it. Makes a huge difference. This is like 3/10 just through this sequence of corners. Later on the brakes, more aggressive on the curbs. Norris gains a huge amount of time here. And then the third apex is roughly the same. It's roughly the same, but Norris is able again. If we watch the sort of the point where they turn in for this third apex. So Norris is attacking the third apex at that angle. Versus Piastri, who has to attack it at this angle. He's like a whole car width to the right. He's making the corner, because he hasn't cut the second apex, not only is he going slower through the second apex, but he's also got a compromised line for the third apex. All these things just add up. Earlier on the brakes, not decelerating as well, not as aggressive on the curbs. All these like a sequence of corners, it's so important to get everything right because one mistake through one part of a sequence affects the rest of the sequence all the way to the end. Norris has huge advantage here over Piastri. Right, coming into the next sequence of corners, really tight, tricky technical section. Norris again has the advantage over Piastri here, mainly in the minimum speeds through. So the first apex here, Norris has a higher minimum speed, but particularly through the second apex, Norris has a higher minimum speed, but is also on the throttle earlier. There's a higher minimum speed, but also carries that speed through the exit as well. So watch Norris through. Again, Norris is tighter on the apex. He's using more of the curb on the apex, which opens up the subsequent apex, the subsequent corner. Watch this. So Norris is up on the curb. Yeah, on the curb. Carries more minimum speed because he's opening his turning radius, which then also opens his entry for the right-hander. Versus Piastri, who doesn't even touch the curb on the first apex, is therefore not opening the corner up as much, so can't go as fast through, which is why his minimum speed is lower, but then can't open the second apex as much because, he's entering the corner from a tighter position. So watch Piastri through the same sequence. Doesn't even touch the first curb and is then compromised on a tight entry for the subsequent apex. And now if we watch the double apex hairpin, Norris is just more committed. He just carries more speed in, but then can attack the throttle earlier as well. It just seems like he has more confidence through this corner. Watch Norris. It looks like it's on the limit, whereas if we watch Piastri through the same corner, it's not bad, but it doesn't look as on the limit as Norris is. He's also turning in slightly later, with slightly more of like a late apex philosophy for the corner. But I think the fact that Norris is carrying the speed in, turning in, doing sort of more of a U-shaped line instead of trying to apex later, allows him to carry that speed through. The car hooks up on the inside. He can get on the throttle earlier, and again he gains another 10th through this corner. So I think he's already up like 4 tenths at this point, which is a huge difference for what is really half a lap at this point, about half a lap. Now we come to the high-speed section of the track. Again, Norris is on another planet through here. Through the first apex, sort of settling the car down a bit. So remember Norris's purple line. Entering actually a little bit slower the first part of the high speed. But then because the car is nice and stable through the first part, he can position the car well for the next sort of right, left, right sequence, which allows him to carry a lot more speed through those corners. So it's an example of a small sacrifice at the start of a sequence of corners to prioritize the rest ends up in a big reward. And it comes back to what I said at the first chicane, where one mistake through a sequence affects everything else to the end of the sequence. It's sort of the opposite of that, because now what Norris is doing here is taking a slightly easier line at the start of the sequence to prepare and actually make gains through the rest of the sequence, which we can see in the data here. Slower through the first apex, much quicker through the S's, the right left, that's this bit here. He's got the car positioned better for then sort of you come to the right left-hander to finish the sequence. It can carry so much more minimum speed through the right and left-hander, which means he then is faster on the exit and he carries that speed all the way down the straight. So have a look. Let's look at Piastri first. After that first apex, the car never looks settled for the whole sequence. It's a little bit twitchy here, a little bit twitchy there. It's just not, the car is not really planted. And it's sort of, once the rear starts to step out a little bit and you start to overheat the surface temperature a little bit, it takes time for the rear to then settle back down and for the grip to come back completely. And it's certainly not within the sequence. You'd have to wait for the next straight and then they'll come back. It's only a very small difference. You know, it might only be a couple degrees of surface temp. But, you know, when you're fighting at what is the top level of motorsport, these things make a huge difference. And watch Norris through that sequence and you'll see what I mean, how the car just looks a little bit more settled through the rest of the sequence because he doesn't push that first apex as much. See there, it's just like the car is just settled. He doesn't overstep the limit at the start of the sequence because then it gives him so much more grip, so much more stability until the end of the sequence of corners. So it's that's my theory. Sorry, that's my theory as to why Norris is so much quicker through the high speed. Now we come into the final, the stadium section. Really, this is a really slow, technical part of the lap. Sort of in terms of time, Norris and Piastri are actually relatively similar through here. Piastri makes one mistake into the sort of the left-hand hairpin, the really slow left-hand hairpin, slightly outbrakes himself, misses the apex slightly, which it doesn't look too bad, but when you're going at slow speed, missing the apex and doing this extra distance makes a much bigger effect on your lap time than it does at high speed, because, you know, time is a function of distance and speed, and if your speed is lower, distance has a much greater effect on the time it takes you to go around a corner, which is why tight lines, hitting your marks through slow speed corners is so much more important. You can get away with a little bit of, you know, imperfection through high speed corners because these things don't have as much of an effect, but through the slow speed corners, precision, not making mistakes, hitting your marks are so important that sometimes it's better to, instead of trying to be always 100% on the limit, back it off a tiny bit and make sure you're doing everything properly and precise. Can actually sometimes be better. So watch Norris through this stadium section. Versus Piastri, and you'll see what I mean. The only real difference here is just that precision through the left-hand hairpin. See here, just a bit wide of the apex. It's not much. It's like a tire width at most. But these things make a difference. It's probably at least half a tenth. So yeah, I mean, overall, you know, it's like half a second between Norris and Piastri here. Huge difference. Main gains are through the first sequence of corners. Norris is just so much more committed on the brakes, gets the car rotated, uses more of the curb, and just has generally a much better line through those sequence of corners. The high speed is the other big difference. Again, it's this case of, it's a sequence of corners. It's a high speed sequence of corners. You're asking a lot from the tires. So it's beneficial, and it is beneficial in this situation, to relax a bit on the first apex, keep the car settled, and then push for the rest of the sequence. Instead of slightly over pushing the first apex, getting the car unsettled, and that compromises you for every apex until you get to a straight where the tires can then cool down, car restabilizes. That's the big difference there. So I think, you know, there's not, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't look like there's anything sort of fundamentally different in the way the cars are set up. It's just confidence. It's just confidence on the brakes, confidence in the high speed, and confidence to trust yourself. You know, when you start to lose confidence, and this has happened to me before as well sometimes, you know, when you have a bad race weekend and you know, things aren't going well, it's so easy to start to over push, because you start to be able to sort of not over push a corner entry and actually tell yourself to, okay, I'm going to relax a bit at the start of the corner, like talking about the high speed sequence now. You have to really trust yourself to do that. And when you start to lose your confidence, or you're having a bad weekend, or there's something else in your head, you start to over push things because you think, oh, I need to try harder. And you start to over push entries, and you know, that's when you have these effects. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening here. You know, these are two very, very good drivers, two elite sports people. But for, you know, people, for any race drivers watching this, you might see similar things in your own racing, whether it's in reality or on the sim. That's the sort of lesson I would take away if I was comparing myself to someone and I saw that sort of tendency start to come up. That's why I'm not saying I know better than these guys. I'm just saying that's what we can learn as race drivers from these guys. So yeah, that's an analysis of qualifying. Hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into the difference between Norris and Piastri, because it's really quite an uncharacteristic difference.